Now, Lieutenant Commander, you are not and never have been a firefighter, yet you would not have agreed to come and sit on this panel if you didn't believe that you could share wisdom that would help us to succeed on the fire ground. So I'd just like to ask you, why is your knowledge, skills, and experience pertinent for leaders on the fire ground?
Well, I roomed with a firefighter for 3 years in college, so that counts for something. Also, so to be just to lay out the disclaimer, anything I say here doesn't necessarily represent naval special warfare. Can everyone hear me in the back? Okay, doesn't necessarily represent naval special warfare. I could never speak for our organization as an entire, with one voice, simply because we're a bunch of argumentative bastards at times and can't seem to agree on anything. Now, that being said, I don't think I necessarily, through my experiences in the teams, have wisdom to share as much as I believe in the vision of leadership under fire. I believe that certain skills, and really more importantly than technical skills, leadership skills and mental skills transcend organizations, transcend baseball, firefighting, the Marine Corps, or the SEAL teams. So selfishly, I'm here a little bit for myself to learn from what I hear from other people and find out where there's similarities and what I can take away back to the teams with me. My hope is that things I say here, shaped from my experiences, will do the same for everyone else. I think that's kind of the objective behind bringing in such a diverse crew as well.
Thank you. As you've already learned a little bit this morning, sir, the fire service today is becoming increasingly fixated on safety, certainty, and explicit guidance and control in tactical operations. This is due in part to science doing a better job of quantifying the risks present in a structure fire, which is leading to a growing intolerance of risk in our occupation. Keeping in mind that the mission of the fire service is to save lives and protect property, if you became our fire chief tomorrow, with your background, what would be your counsel related to risk and certainty in tactical operations?
So some of you may not like this answer. Culturally, we'll find out. But my thought is, if we're getting better at quantifying risk, then theoretically we should be able to manage it better. Our goal should never be to reduce risk to zero. So if we can quantify it and manage it better, then we should be able to do more dangerous things. We should be able to push the envelope even further than we have in the past to become more effective at our mission. In the SEALs, we don't have doctrine. We don't have the MCDPs, partly because we're too lazy to write anything down. But that's true. But partly also, it's a half joke, partly because it's purposeful. We're a very small organization, and we thrive on creativity. And we feel that if we write down doctrine, then we'll be self-constrained. And that's very distasteful to us. We never want to let ourselves be constrained by our own policies. So we don't write it down. But we talk about it a lot. And when I frame risk, we're always thinking about it. Everything we do, we think about with regards to risk. I tell our new guys, these 18, 19-year-old guys, when you're going into a bar looking for a lady on a Friday night, you're assessing risk when you walk in that door. You're assessing the scene outside as you go in. You're looking to see who might be trouble. You're measuring up the competition. You're assessing if they might be a risk to your health, physical well-being, and you're assessing the risk with certain females out there. Some more risky than others across a wide spectrum. That's assessing risk. And we tell this to them to not make risk sound dirty. The danger in any organization, I think, is to take something in spirit being a good effort and turning it into a process, and we institutionalize it, and the bureaucracy takes hold, and it becomes a form that we fill out. And we have those in the teams, unfortunately. And we have these risk assessments. And what happens is I say, hey, we're going out on an evolution, fill out a risk assessment. What happens is human nature takes over. Guys, pull up the last one from the same evolution, copy, paste, print, and there's often times where I'm reading over the risk assessment and it's got a date from a year ago, and someone else's name on the top. So you didn't even bother to change it. So I know right away, okay, this guy's not assessing the risk of the situation. I could care less about forms. What we want are guys to take that pause. How do you institutionalize guys taking that pause and thinking through it? We say we want you to assess risk to mission and risk to force with everything. Sometimes we're willing to accept more on one or the other depending on what we're doing. You talked about the mission, the man and me, sometimes being flipped. We call that the hierarchy of loyalties. It can start all the way up at country if you want, but country, community, naval special warfare, team, teammate, self. There are times, though, where we flip those. That's okay. Very rarely do we go on a mission where I say the risk to mission is more important than the risk to force. 99% of what we do, risk to force is my number one priority. Obviously, protecting our country, protecting our freedoms, the Constitution, all those things are the underscored effort. But when it comes to me taking risk for my men, that's my number one priority, is to reduce that. However, and I think this is where it's more applicable and tied parallel to what you do as firefighters, when we're talking about a hostage rescue operation where we're going in to save a human being from the situation they have found themselves in, it's one of the only times where our risk to force is put aside, where the risk to mission is now more important, where we will run into a door with bullets flying everywhere to sacrifice ourselves, if need be, for another human being. That's a conscious decision we make, and it's a switch that we flip on and off depending on the mission. I think that's probably the same for you. I imagine your calculus is very different going into a burning building that is empty versus one that has a lot of people, infants, babies, whatever. You're going to approach the problem differently, as do we. But that takes, I think, years of purposeful training, of thinking through how much risk am I willing to accept, and measuring that. And it's a constant, to borrow the Marine Corps phrase, the OODA loop, which I've heard numerous times through my career. I think it's a constant reassessment of the situation. You may be willing to accept more risk to your force on the initial portion, and now once those hostages and or people in the building are secured, okay, now we're going to take a step back, pregnant pause, have some tactical patience, and figure out how to methodically take this problem down.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was a long way to answer the question. Sorry.
That's a good answer. One of the similarities between the fire service and the special warfare community is that despite planning and intelligence, we're often faced with situations that are urgent and confusing. So we would ask, what tenets of maneuver warfare help tactical teams to succeed when uncertainty and chaos are threatening the mission?
Yeah, one of the jokes that we have is we plan so that we have something to deviate from. And it's a half truth. That one's actually a full truth. For those Marines out there, how many of you guys have ever been on an op that went perfectly planned? I mean, it just doesn't happen. But when you have a plan, we have a foundation by which we know we will deviate from, but that we can always come back to. And it at least provides a framework to move forward. So maneuver warfare, I thought about how to answer this one, and I don't think the answer is to start talking about tactics with you. There's always the fundamental truths. Always go for the high ground. Work for the flank. We saw some of those in the arrows, and I think more important and universal to what we've all been talking about here is the mindset for maneuver warfare. And that comes in that comfortability deviating from the plan. You have to be comfortable breaking the mold. You have to be comfortable going into a situation thinking it's going to end one way and go in a completely different course. I read a book, and it was frightening to me. Not a Good Day to Die. Has anyone in here read it by chance? Yeah. So, huge book. Intimidating to read, but all about Operation Anaconda early in the Afghan campaign, post 9/11. And one of the frightening things to me was they planned this gigantic raid into this valley, treacherous mountains on either side. All the logistics have been set on, boom, 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 massive effort, and we're getting ready to go. They hadn't stepped off yet. No one had started moving, but they had advanced elements out in the field, some special forces guys who were reading the terrain and sending back reports. And at the last minute, come these reports that said, hey, we need a tank. We realize there's Taliban and Al Qaeda entrenched in the mountains in these caves that we didn't know about. They have the high ground. They have the superior angles and the firepower. They have the tactical advantage. Like, let's not do this. We need to take a pause and come back and try something different. And the answer in the book, which is what really happened, well, we're too far along in the planning to change. So we're going to go ahead. And it's interesting. It's terrifying to think that there are leaders out there that would make these decisions. Yet I've actually seen this in my career quite a bit, and I think it's this willingness to lie to oneself and then just hope for the best. I don't know if that rings a bell with anyone, but it's like in the face of completely contradicting evidence, you're going to plow forward anyway and just hope it all works out in the end. And it's completely insane. It doesn't make any sense. And I don't know if you've seen this in the firefighting industry or not. But being comfortable deviating from what you've been taught is right or what you've planned for to be right, we've got to be comfortable doing that. At a moment's notice, before the mission starts, before the firefight starts, I think, or during it, as the situation changes, we've got to be able to deviate, and you've got to be able to thrive in that environment as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. So missions and resources are different in the fire service, and we're going to build upon that a little bit. They're different in the fire service than they are in the SEALs.
Yeah.
But in both arenas, speed of execution is critical to seizing and keeping initiative, and oftentimes to winning the battle. So how does mutual trust and implicit communication factor into mission success? Or if I were to say it another way, I'd say how would the effectiveness of your team be diminished if you relied upon explicit guidance and control?
So if we relied on explicit guidance and control, I think we would cease to be the SEAL teams. We would become more conventional in our mindset. I don't say that to slam conventional Department of Defense elements. They're essential, they're necessary. We don't do what Marines do. We don't do what Big Army does. We don't take key terrain and hold it for long periods of time. We just don't have the size for that. I think Colonel Black earlier joked about the whole one platoon. Like, we're very comfortable in these small teams doing these surgical things, but we're not the sledgehammer. That being said, to answer the question, we practice what we call command by negation. And it's very effective for us, and it's very effective for how we operate on the battlefield. And what that means is if I'm a ground force commander of an operation in Afghanistan, that means I'm the head guy in charge, making calls. I don't micromanage my men. We have command by negation, and what that means is my guys will call me and inform me what they're doing. And I implicitly let them do it because I know that they have the best advantage or the best angle or perception on what needs to happen on that particular piece of the target. The counter example would be a guy coming over the radio and saying, "Hey, sir, can I do this?" And then me coming back and saying, "Yes, you may do that," and then them coming back and saying, "Okay, I'm going to do this." Depending on what he's asking to do, you've just tied up the net and probably sacrificed a minute or two figuring out how to say yes. That's ridiculous. That comes with trust, though, trust and confidence in the men that I'm employing. If I have trust and confidence in their ability to read the tactical situation and respond to the threats, then I should be able to trust them to make decisions without me saying, yes, you may. Someone mentioned something to this earlier that said, "Mother, may I?" I can't remember which speaker it was. That's how we roll, and we find it to be very effective. It's also very chaotic, and that can be intimidating, but it just takes too long otherwise, and we find on the battlefield often the enemy is lighter than we are. They're not wearing body armor. We're in their terrain. We're in their home, so they know that environment physically. And so if we're not able to move quickly with approvals to respond to the threats, then they're gonna beat us to them. They're going to beat us to the high ground, and now you have a whole other problem in front of you. So we do that. We empower our leaders to make decisions and act, which I think translates to speed, even when wearing 100 pounds of stuff. It's worked well for us.
So, sir, maybe with the next question, we may be able to build on that, and maybe, frankly, you've answered it, but how do you build a team that thrives in chaos?
Start with a lot of beer. Again, half-truths. No, I think to thrive in chaos, you have to train in chaos. This was an interesting question. I thought a lot about it. I know a lot of people raised their hands and said they read On Combat. A lot of us have read that as well and done some studies in response to reading that. One of them was very interesting. So they studied cortisol levels. So and I hope there's no one who's really, really smart in this realm, because otherwise I'm going to probably trip up on myself, but I'll try to get the point across. It said, so in a stressful situation, your cortisol levels will shoot through the roof, and your body will automatically start producing a counter hormone that helps bring you back down to that sweet spot. Someone mentioned earlier, that sweet spot where you're going to optimally perform with the optimum amount of stress. So it said, in a normal room of people, if a bear walks in the door, a big old grizzly bear, and starts growling, people's cortisol levels are going to spike through the roof, and they're going to freeze. And it's going to slowly, their body will slowly adjust, and they'll come down, and it'll take them a long time to get to this sweet spot of where they'll actually be able to make decisions. And we see this in the news all the time, people that panic, right? In school shootings or the movie theater shootings where, there's someone who comes in the door with a gun or represents a life-threatening situation, and there's a way out right there or a way to defend oneself, and instead of taking it, people lock up and freeze because they're incapable of making decisions. The blood drains from their head. They lose, fine motor skills, and they freeze. They panic. So, we're going through this class, and they're telling us this study they did, and they said, what do you think happened with SEALs when we ran them through this type of stress test to see what would happen? And, of course, the egomaniacs that we are, we thought, well, we probably jumped right up to the optimal line and then just stayed there forever. And they said, no, you're way off. You guys actually spiked like 2 times higher than a normal human being on cortisol. So you really freak out, and then you come down really quickly, though, to the sweet spot. So while someone else stays freaked out, you guys just go like off the charts, crazy, insane panic, but then bounce right back down and you maintain, and then you make your decisions and you move forward. And I thought that was really interesting. And then the follow-on question, is that a nurture or a nature piece? Because that's chaos. So that's how we respond in chaos physically. It's what our body's doing. How did we get there as an organization? I don't think it's nature as much as it is nurture. It's probably a little bit of nature. Probably people that are attracted to our organization are on the fringes of society anyway, not the quite right in the head people. But we foster that, and we build upon that, and we introduce stress to people, which they interpret as life-threatening scenarios, and sometimes they are. We do this thing in the pool where we put a guy on a scuba regulator, throw him down in the bottom of the pool, and spin him around, take his mask off, punch him in the ribs, and tie his air hose in knots. And one of our instructors came to us and said, this turd over here, we're going to kick him out of here because he's panicking underwater. To which we respond, well, he's drowning. Of course he's panicking. But can we work on that? Can we fix that? Is he trainable? Can we train that panic out of him to stay calm and solve the problem in the midst of life-threatening situations? Depends on the guy, but I find that, so this is what's interesting too. So that pool competency test that we did, our first instinct was, no, we can't train that out of a guy. You either have it or you don't. You're born with it or not. Then we did a statistical study of everyone that's ever taken that test, and this was very interesting. We found that given enough tries, our pass rate for that specific test was in the 94 percentile. So of 100 people that take it, given enough tries, 94% will graduate that test at some point. The only question is how many tries are we going to give them. What that teaches me is that it's trainable. You can train someone to thrive in chaos. You can train someone to lower that cortisol, their body to respond naturally, and thrive in a chaos, life-threatening situation and get to that sweet spot where they're making clear, conscious decisions.
Thank you. My next question is, how do you define moral courage when operating in uncertainty and danger? And how do you give moral courage?
I think moral courage is tied partly to integrity, which you mentioned, which I think is very important. like you alluded to as well, I don't necessarily think moral courage is always doing the right thing. I think that's part of it, trying to do the right thing. But you have to understand also in my community, we live in the gray. So that's not the black and it's not the white, it's the gray. And we bounce around a lot in there. And we look for ways to get to yes with what we need to get done on the battlefield. That involves very fuzzy lines and sometimes making mistakes. Sometimes interpreting commander's intent. Jason mentioned that, incorrectly. So I think part of moral courage is understanding that nobody's perfect. It's trying to make the right decisions in very stressful and threatening situations, but then recognizing that we will fail. Moral courage is disdaining failure, but accepting it as the reality of what we're doing. Like I said, we're not going to be able to, nor should we reduce risk to zero. So then taking that and saying, okay, well, how do we apply that? How do we fall forward? How do we teach someone to take that mistake, that failure, own it, and now move on and use that to become a better human being, a better operator, a better father, a better husband, whatever the case may be. That to me is difficult to do. Instead of the counter of lying to oneself, hiding mistakes, falsifying documents to cover ourselves, we try to avoid that. We'd rather a guy make his mistake, come clean with it, and that takes moral courage, I think.
Thank you, Dan. Now, you did touch on this when you spoke about command by negation, but I'd just like to come back and touch on it once more. How much latitude are you generally given by your commanders when making decisions in the field, and how much latitude do you give your subordinates to make deviations and change the effects of things downstream during a mission or operation? And does the degree of latitude in the command structure affect the team's potential for success?
I think it depends on the leader, on how much we are given by our commanders. We have good SEAL leaders and we've had bad SEAL leaders, and I've worked for both. I worked for one leader that, before target was secure, was calling me on a cell phone in Afghanistan to find out the details of what was going on. Very micromanaging, reduced my role as a ground force commander to a communicator. That's crippling, because if he's crippling me by not letting me be a ground force commander, then I'm being taken out of my job to communicate to him every little thing of what's happening on target. The result of that is the guy below me has to step up and fill my shoes now. And then the guy below him has to step into his shoes, and so we're less effective on the battlefield. In naval special warfare, we like to say we have flat leadership, where we try to avoid this hierarchy. Now, we have a hierarchy because we are in the military, and that's just the nature of DoD, and that's fine. But I think it takes maturity and some finesse to be able to work through that horizontally. Micromanagement versus autonomy. Without autonomy, I think we're never going to be effective or as effective as we could. We sometimes get lucky, like Colonel Black was mentioning. Sometimes the targets are so easy that it really doesn't matter. It's transparent. We'll reach mission success either way. But then the question is, how effective do we want to be? Do we want to reach our optimal potential? And then when we do get the really hard target that we can't afford inefficiencies on, then I think we need to have that autonomy. You always push for that. What's interesting, though, is I've seen people push for autonomy until they're the guy in charge. And then all of a sudden they want to just control every piece of it. And you can't. You've got to let go. That's hard to do. It's hard to do. Because we give commanders intent, like Jason said. Even when we give commanders intent, we have a vision of what we think it should look like, right? What you thought this conference would look like. So it's probably very uncomfortable as we've deviated around Jason's commander's intent through this conference. Yet, the beauty in that is we'll probably end up with a better product on the backside than he probably envisioned in the first place. And by the way, it's not his conference now. It's a joint effort, and other people have grown through that process as well. Their leadership development, their ability to learn, and so it's enriched the process for everybody. That's worth that individual sacrifice from a leader to let go of those reins a little, I think.
So not only have you had the opportunity to fight the enemy as a SEAL, you've also played important roles in training SEALs. And in your opinion, similar to a question that we asked Mr. Alderson, in your opinion, what are the most important traits to identify and develop in your special warfare leaders?
This is a great question, and we were actually talking about this earlier because as he's developing baseball players and we're developing SEALs, we've come to a cultural shift in our community recently. So for 50 years, it's about how long we've been building SEALs. We've been overvaluing physical performance and undervaluing what we call character. Now, when I say character, I don't mean choir boy. I think I made it apparent that choir boys typically aren't attracted to our community. But if a choir boy wants to come to the SEALs, that's fine. What I mean by character is, does this potential candidate have the character attributes I want in a teammate? And that's the revolution we're really having in the SEAL teams right now is saying, okay, that's what we want. Now, it's probably incorrect to say we undervalued it. I think we always valued that. I don't think we knew how to quantify it. You talk about quantifying risk. Well, now we're learning how to quantify character attributes as well. And we're realizing that we can do this. You know, what we used to call the turd factor was we'd be an instructor and we'd say, oh, that guy's a turd, kick him out of here. Now, that guy's a stud. It was either a turd or a stud. Those were the two terms that we used to identify our candidates. That was as far as our vocabulary got. So we realized that wasn't adequate. So we brought in these psychologists, the guys in the back that are the smart guys, and they stood next to us and we said, hey, that guy's a turd. And I said, okay, well, what do you mean by turd? Well, I mean he sucks. Okay, well, yeah. That's redundant. So what is it you're seeing in him that you don't like? Well, I don't know. He's not a teammate. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? Well, they're on the log, and I don't know how many people have seen log PT on TV. It's one of the things we do to stress the team before self. And we basically give this big telephone pole to 6 guys, and we have them do different exercises, whether it's, over the head or sit-ups with them or running down the beach where they're bouncing on your shoulder. And it sucks. This gigantic log just bounced on your collarbone and rubbing it raw. Well, you can identify very quickly with that who's not a teammate, who's not willing to put self-sacrifice as his number one priority because he'll start ducking his shoulder a little bit. And when he ducks his shoulder, what was 30 or 40 pounds distributed to each guy all of a sudden becomes, 70 pounds between each guy, and everyone else gets really pissed really quickly. So that guy doesn't have a character attribute we're looking for. He's selfish. Now that may be a data point. We're not going to make a decision on a data point, but we're going to take that data point, we're going to file it away, and we're going to look for a trend. And if we see a trend of data showing us that this guy is selfish, that he's going to duck under that log or duck under that boat, those are indications that when it comes time for operating in a chaotic environment where lives actually matter, he might be more selfish than the guy we need on our team. He might be the guy not willing to run through the door for an American hostage and accept bullets on his body as a result. That's not who we're looking for. So the traits, the important traits for us are those specific character attributes we want in a teammate, but those aren't going to necessarily be applicable to you. We did a lot of analysis and a lot of surveys to figure out what was important to the SEALs. You touched on this, sir. Each culture, you have to identify culturally what's important to you before you can say, as an organization, we're going to advocate these values and we're going to reinforce them. So I think step one is, what is your culture value in a teammate? For us, there was 10 attributes, and we boiled all these things down and clustered them and said, yeah, this is what we believe in. This is the guy we're looking for, or girl. Just to be clear, we don't have female SEALs yet, but we operate with SEALs downrange. And so the way we say it is, they're no less our teammates than a guy wearing a trident on his chest as well. And we look for similar character attributes in whoever we're going to have on our team. These days, everything's joint, and there are absolutely zero operations I know of that were completely unilateral SEAL operations that we've done. Not one. There's always been at least one other person from some other organization that's been a part of them to provide some capability that we felt we could, someone else was an expert in. So step one is defining those attributes that matter to you culturally. If you don't do that, I don't think you'll succeed, because there's a saying a guy came up with recently that I love. He says, and it's really what you were saying as well, culture will eat strategy for breakfast every single day. It doesn't matter how perfectly crafted your strategy is to change your culture or affect something in your culture. If it's not appealing to that culture where it stands at the beginning, it's just not going to work. It's a fruitless effort. Step two would be reinforcing those values organizationally. And what I mean by that is, I can't remember the three things, but the great examples, if you ever read Netflix Model for Leadership, it's awesome. One of the things they talk about is reinforcing cultural values in your organization and reinforcing them by awarding people who represent them and punishing people who do not. The example they gave was Enron had their cultural values were something like integrity, commitment, and something else, and they were etched into the granite foundation of their building. That's what they said they believed in, yet in practice they didn't. And that will self-destruct any organization or any culture if you're saying you believe in one thing and you're not reinforcing it. So it's a fuzzy answer, but I think it works.
Well, we appreciate that. Would you share with us a very important leadership lesson that you have learned under fire?
So the last question kind of leads into this one as well. Understanding your own culture. Sun Tzu, I think it was Sun Tzu. Didn't you say, know your enemy and know thyself? Is that right? Sure, we'll go with that. Google it later and don't tell me if I was wrong. Knowing your enemy is very important. I think knowing yourself is even more important. And knowing yourself, I think, means knowing the culture that you're leading, that you're managing. And if you don't understand that culture and how to manage and lead those men and women, you're going to be ineffective. That's been a very difficult leadership lesson for me. One of the books predating On Combat that Grossman wrote was on killing. I read that early in my career, and it actually kind of rocked me. It made me take a turn in what I believe, because he talked about the psychological effect killing human beings has on others. And I figured this might be something important for me to learn or know about going into my job field. And he talks about how removed the bomber pilot to the act, how each stage closer to the act of killing changes what it does to someone's brain. All the way up to like a knife kill. There's different levels. I won't bore you with all of them. Plus, it's a little morbid. But what was interesting that came out of that was, he said as part of his studies, he had looked at the mental makeup of SOF warriors, and so Special Operations Forces. And he said, remarkably, very, very similar mental makeups to sociopathic serial killers. Very, very similar mindsets. That scared me a little bit. Because, here we were going into two major wars, and, I was hearing some of my men talk about the desire to go kill the enemy. And I had a hard time reconciling that. How do you, God, we're Americans. What do you mean? What do you mean you desire to go kill? Yet, the more I talked, the more I realized there was a little bit of that innate desire in me as well. Someone mentioned earlier, you're a firefighter, you want to go fight fires. You're a Navy SEAL, you just want to go shoot bad guys in the face. It's part of the deal. So coming to grips with, okay, there's very similar mental makeups here. That was hard to kind of come to grips with, but once I did, I was able to understand my men and manage them more. As a leader, that came into play down the field years later. Jason talked earlier about the loss we had in Afghanistan when I was forward. So that was the largest loss of SEAL life, and I think SOF unit lives in the history of SOF as we know it. It was also the largest mass casualty in the history of the Afghan War, our longest war in American history. So a pretty significant event, and we were right there with it. My troop then took over for them. We moved into their tents. We packed up their belongings and sent them home to their wives and their kids and their mothers, and we slept in their beds. And within 30 days, we were fully stood up as a strike force and inherited their area of operations and began taking it back to the enemy. So my biggest challenge as a leader with that was understanding the desire my men had for vengeance and I had for vengeance, yet also how do you manage that and how do you lead collectively so that we won't indiscriminately kill people on the battlefield, so that we won't hurt the overall strategic effort and the American image by murdering innocents just in a vengeful rage. How do you guide that? How do you shape that? And how do you prevent it? Well, I can tell you, step one is understanding our culture, and understanding what I'd read from Dave Grossman years before helped me do that, because knowing who we are and what we like to do prevented me from taking a draconian approach and saying, all right, guys, let's all have a big meeting, and, all right, we can't have anyone killing any women and kids out there, and we can't, doing something like that would be false. It would be, they would have seen right through me. It would have been cheesy. It would have been the guy up there giving the really important talk that everybody knows he doesn't believe in and doesn't care about, right? So how do you do that? How do you lead men to do something that is going to be incredibly difficult? I don't have 5 hours to explain how we did it, but it involved a lot of meetings, a lot of key leaders talking through these events, and then planting ideas along the way slowly as we got there. But really more important than the nuts and bolts of how we did it was, I think the important piece is understanding that culture, understanding who you're leading, understanding how to manage them, not faulting them for who they are as people or as a culture, that's who you are, but understanding how to lead them. You can't lead a Marine like you can lead a SEAL, like you can lead a firefighter, like you can lead a third baseman. They're different cultures. You have to appeal to that culture and figure out how to shape and guide, and that's incredibly difficult. And I can't say I've always been successful doing it, but to take it back to your answer, I think that's the most important leadership lesson I've learned. There's not one tool that will be applicable across every problem.
Thank you. And finally, sir, could you tell us even quite generally about a time when you survived or perhaps even thrived when you were undermanned and outgunned?
Yeah, this was a hard one, simply because I've never been undermanned and outgunned. Half truths. We're very calculated in how we approach the battlefield, and so without any ego at all, I do say that we're very rarely outmanned and outgunned, because we are judicious about where we can go, where we want to go, what we want to do. As soft, a lot of times we have the option of turning down operations that we think are bogus. That guy's not worth the risk we're going to take by going after him. A lot of people in the DoD don't have that luxury, so they find themselves in situations that are outside their ability to control. That's unfortunate, but it's also necessary. We have a lot more luxury. So there's an occasion, it does happen. Everyone's seen Lone Survivor, I'm sure. So it happens from time to time, but they're really few and far between. Normally we own the battle space when we're there. We own the night, and we're very careful about how we move and maneuver, staying, ideally 3 or 4 steps ahead of the enemy. So when he decides to move, we've already countered it, and it's actually kind of anticlimactic. 99% of my ops have been very anticlimactic, not like the movies at all, because we're so far ahead of the problem that there's nothing they can even do to get out of it, and it's actually kind of embarrassing. It is. But so to answer your question, I thought, well, what's something similar to that? So I thought, well, instead of being undermanned or outgunned, on my heels maybe would be. So I have found myself on my heels, and this ties back to the previous example and what Jason had talked about earlier. Losing that many guys in 1 second was unparalleled in our history, and we found ourselves on our heels, and we found ourselves in a situation that we weren't familiar with, and we didn't know how to respond to. We didn't have mass casualty processes in place to deal with something like this. We had to pull guys off leave back home just for the notification process of going to these wives and these mothers all over the country and telling them, hopefully before Facebook caught on. this produced, as I'm sure you can imagine, a very caustic response from a lot of family members, and everything from wives storming the compound saying, bring our husbands home, to widows across the entire spectrum of what you'd expect to see and what you wouldn't expect to see. And so the big question was, what are we going to do? A lot of them wanted us to come home. They said, hey, we've never had anything like this before. You guys just need to pack up shop and come home and take care of this back home. Bury your brothers and be with your families. And there was a logical thought process to that, and it's a very rational course of action we could have taken. And instead we said, no, we're going to stay and we're going to fight. And so, we Skyped our parents and we Skyped our wives and we said, we're still in the fight and we're going to see it to the end of our responsibility. And we're going to do what we came here to do, and we're not going to leave till it's done. And that's the best thing we can do for our own healing. And that's hard to say. It was difficult to do, but sometimes the right decision is not the easy decision. It's probably usually true. So, one of the things in our ethos is I'm never out of the fight, and that's really what we stuck to in that moment when we were on our heels, when we were unsure of what to do, how to respond to what happened. And then, it leads back to that previous question, to not leave you hanging. We were very responsible on the battlefield and judicious and surgical in the enemy we went after, and remarkably effective in how we did it. And again, I don't say that with any pride. I was very proud of the men that we led to take it after the enemy so carefully and precisely, with no collateral damage, with no civilians killed in the process. It was fantastic. So we responded, to that shock. We got our bell rung in that moment, and we took it and we leaned forward. And I think that again ties back to what we're talking about by mentally maneuvering. It's one thing to take a punch. You got to be able to return it as well. And we're going to take punches in the SEALs. We're going to, in the Marines and in the fire, we're going to have losses. We're not going to be able to mitigate that risk to zero. How you respond after taking that punch is critical. And I think, making yourself hard to kill, that's what it's about. It's about, falling forward, picking yourself back up and staying in the fight. Dave Grossman calls it the bulletproof mind. Whatever you want to call it, it's an aggressive mindset. It's never being out of the fight, no matter what fight you're talking about or what enemy you're talking about fighting. Al-Qaeda, Taliban, a fire. Never being out of it, never quitting. It's okay to fail. It's not okay to quit. And I think that's what defines survivors. Not always. There's always that element of luck. But if there's a chance and you have that aggressive mindset, I think that's when you're going to survive.
That's the end of my questions for you, sir. Thank you for your insight and for coming today. And, of course, thank you for your service.
Thanks.